The colonel's voice thundered through the concrete halls of the military training compound, echoing like a commandment that could not be disobeyed. Everyone froze when he barked an order. Even seasoned officers avoided his gaze. His reputation preceded him: a ruthless, uncompromising, a man who believed discipline was carved from humiliation and fear rather than respect. For the recruits who had the misfortune of being under his watch, it was like walking through fire every day. Among them was Lieutenant Aria Kane, a woman whose resilience often made her stand out in a male-dominated environment. She had risen quickly, not just because of her sharp instincts, but because she carried an inner steel few could comprehend. But the colonel, a man who despised being challenged especially by women, saw her as a threat to his authority. It began as subtle digs. He dismissed her tactical reports, ridiculed her ideas during briefings, and made her the target of his harshest drills. She endured it quietly, her silence not out of fear, but calculation. To her, patience was a weapon, and she had mastered the art of waiting. That patience was tested on a stormy evening after a grueling field exercise. The recruits were dismissed to the barracks, mud-streaked and exhausted, when the colonel called out, "Kane, stay behind." The others exchanged wary glances. Some muttered apologies as they left her behind, for they all knew the colonel's wrath wasn't something anyone wanted to witness firsthand. Aria walked into his office, shoulders squared, her boots leaving wet prints across the floor. The colonel closed the door behind her and locked it with a click that sounded louder than thunder. "What's your game, Kane?" His voice was low, almost a growl. "You think because you're sharp on the field, you can undermine me?" "I don't undermine you, sir," she said evenly. "I follow orders." "That's your problem," he sneered, stepping closer, towering over her. "You don't just follow, you perform better than half the men here." "Makes them look weak, makes me look weak, and I don't tolerate weakness." His hand shot out suddenly, gripping the back of her neck with vice-like strength. Before she could react, he forced her toward the adjoining restroom. Her palms slammed against the porcelain rim of the toilet as he shoved her head down, cold water splashing against her face. "Maybe this will remind you where you stand," he snarled, pressing harder. Her lungs screamed for air. The humiliation burned more than the suffocation. But Aria Kane was not the kind of woman who broke under pressure. Deep in her chest, a fire ignited, a not of fear, but of controlled rage. She let herself go limp for a second, pretending to surrender. The colonel, mistaking her compliance for defeat, loosened his grip ever so slightly. That was his mistake. With a sudden burst of strength, she twisted her body, grabbing his wrist and wrenching it backward with a practiced movement. The colonel stumbled, cursing in shock as his balance faltered. In a blink, she reversed their positions, shoving him face first toward the very toilet he had tried to drown her in. His muffled shout echoed as his nose struck the rim, and she pressed down, forcing him against the cold porcelain. "Sir," she said, her voice calm but laced with steel, "respect is earned, not taken by force." He thrashed, but she held him firm, leveraging not just her strength but precise training drilled into her from years of combat conditioning. Her grip was unyielding, her stance immovable. She could hear him gagging, his pride drowning far faster than his lungs. When she finally released him, he staggered back, dripping and gasping for breath, his face pale with shock and fury. "You're finished," he hissed, clutching his bruised wrist. "I'll have you court-martialed, stripped of rank. You'll regret this." But Aria only straightened her uniform, her eyes never leaving his. "With all due respect, sir, I don't think you'll be telling anyone about this." The threat hung in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. She had seen the flash of shame in his eyes, the realization that if word spread about what just happened, his career would crumble. No colonel could recover from being overpowered and humiliated by a lieutenant he tried to abuse. For days, the base buzzed with whispers. Recruits noticed the change first. The colonel no longer singled Kane out, no longer mocked her during drills. In fact, he avoided her altogether, his once thunderous voice suddenly subdued whenever she was around. But rumors have a way of slipping through cracks. A sergeant who had passed by the office that stormy night had heard muffled shouts, followed by an unusual silence. Word trickled down, twisted and embellished, until the recruits began piecing together their own version of events. Some claimed Kane had knocked him unconscious. Others swore she nearly drowned him. Whatever the truth, one fact became undeniable. The colonel's authority was shaken, and Kane's reputation soared. Weeks later, the true shock came during a surprise inspection from the higher command. General Whitmore himself arrived to evaluate the colonel's unit. During the debriefing, the general questioned the recruits about discipline, morale, and leadership. One by one, the soldiers hesitated, glancing at each other before finally someone spoke. "Sir," a young private said, "with respect to Broken Bar, Lieutenant Kane has been more of a leader to us than the colonel." A ripple of agreement spread through the room. Even those who feared the colonel nodded. The general's eyes narrowed. "Is that so?" The colonel shifted uncomfortably, sweat beading on his forehead. He opened his mouth to retort, but Kane stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "With respect, General, the colonel runs a tight unit, but sometimes fear gets mistaken for respect. What these men need is someone who pushes them to be better, not someone who breaks them down." It was a dangerous statement, one that could have ended her career, but instead of anger, the general looked intrigued. He studied her, then glanced at the colonel, who looked like he might collapse under the weight of unspoken accusations. In the weeks that followed, an inquiry was quietly launched. Testimonies from recruits painted a picture of the colonel as a tyrant, using humiliation and cruelty as tools of command. The final nail came when medical records revealed injuries consistent with unnecessary force during training exercises. The colonel was relieved of his duties. His fall from grace was swift and absolute. Aria Kane, on the other hand, was promoted, not just for her tactical brilliance, but for her ability to inspire loyalty among those she led. She became the kind of officer soldiers willingly followed, and not because they feared her, but because they trusted her. And though no official record ever mentioned that stormy night in the colonel's office, the story spread quietly through the ranks, becoming something of a legend. Recruits whispered it in the barracks, passing it down like folklore, how a colonel tried to drown a lieutenant, and how she turned the tables, leaving him broken and humiliated. To outsiders, it sounded exaggerated, almost impossible, but to those who knew her, it was exactly the kind of thing Aria Kane would do. Months later, during a training exercise in the desert, one of the recruits asked her about it directly. "Ma'am, is it true what they say you did to the colonel?" She paused, adjusting her gear, the sun beating down on her face. A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Does it matter?" she asked. The recruit hesitated. "I guess not, but to Broken Bar it gives us hope. That we don't always have to take what's thrown at us. That we can fight back." Her smile widened, though her eyes stayed hard. "Then let that be the lesson you carry. The enemy isn't always out there on the battlefield. Sometimes it's standing right beside you, and when that happens, you don't bow, you don't break, you fight back." The recruit nodded, his chest swelling with pride, and ran to catch up with the others. As Aria watched her unit move across the sands, she felt the weight of her own words settle into her bones. She hadn't just survived the colonel's cruelty, she had turned it into a moment that reshaped the entire base. Because sometimes, it wasn't the battles fought on foreign soil that defined a soldier. It was the wars waged in silence, in locked rooms, against enemies wearing the same uniform. And in that war, she had won.